This is a huge question, but if we can sort of boil it down, I mean, what did Freud get right and what did he get wrong in terms of sort of framing the whole notion of the unconscious?
Okay. So on this topic, I did a very extensive review of the neuroscience literature. So most people in cognitive neuroscience aren't really setting out, consciously at least, to investigate psychoanalytic ideas. But some are doing it without even knowing it. And so I went through a lot of the literature and wrote this review on what we're starting to glean from our understanding in basic cognitive neuroscience research about classic psychoanalytic ideas.
Right.
And what the evidence, at least from what I could glean, is that things like suppression, repression, dissociation, we are finding neural correlates to that phenomenon. So you'll have, let's say somebody suppresses a memory, you'll have increased activation of a part of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which will downregulate a memory area of the brain, the hippocampus. And you can clearly see this when somebody is actively trying to push a memory away. Yeah. And what's really interesting is some people say, well, you get the white bear effect. If you say don't think of a white bear, or that's what you'll think of. But they had a really great strategy in this where they said they learned word pairs and they said don't think of the word that goes with this word. And so it was this one-step removal that people were able to actually not remember. And when you gave them a memory test later, they actually did worse on the words that they were told to suppress. And you could see a pattern there. So these kinds of experiments, the same thing with dissociation. Repression is harder to get at because repression, as you were saying, it happens automatically. You can't just say, okay, repress now, But there were some studies which got at it quite subtly and interestingly, examples of where we can show people things subliminally, where we mask it using certain techniques. And we can see where their attention goes. And for example, this wasn't my study, this was a study done by another group, but they had naked women and naked men presented subliminally. And then you do these tests where you can see where a person was attending to. And what they found is they gave it to heterosexual men and women and homosexual men. And they found that, sure enough, the heterosexual women would more unconsciously attend to the naked man image, and the heterosexual men would unconsciously attend to the naked woman. But the heterosexual men would avert their attention from the naked man. Unconsciously, this would happen. So this was sort of ways at getting at, and what's the neural basis of this sort of what you might call repression of homosexual desires. But obviously they're not perfect. Yeah. They're difficult to get to. But I think these kinds of things, at least we can start to test experimentally. Some of Freud's other concepts of, I don't know, the Oedipal complex, or when he got into the more, what was it, the monotheism and that kind of stuff is harder to actually look at experimentally. So, but I think we can start to investigate these ideas.
George?
Yeah, and I think that actually is wrapped around a very big idea that Freud was right about, and it's a weird idea, because what he actually postulated was that the mind in some way is self-regulating. Now, he did this when he was surrounded by mechanistic models of machines and clanking gears and things like that, and souls. He said the mind actually sought out to protect itself from overstimulation. That was the basic idea for the idea of defense. So there were two ideas about the unconscious that the Freudians had. One was descriptive. Descriptive just meant like it's a jungle out there. Your attention is focused on whatever it's focused on, but if I say, hey, think about what happened when you were 5, you can look at that part of the jungle or that part of the jungle or that. That's the descriptive unconscious. But he postulated this other thing called the dynamic unconscious, where there was a barrier to bringing it to consciousness. You couldn't just focus yourself there. And this is the beginning, as you just heard, there are all sorts of different manifestations of it. Some of it will end up being right, some of it will end up being not so perfect or maybe even wrong. But the general idea is that we have the capacity to self-regulate and protect a kind of internal homeostasis. That's a fascinating idea, and it was quite original at the time.